Hi, welcome back. I'm Thelma English. Welcome to British Literature Survey. We are on session 18. This is a class for advanced placement high school students. Kids who read everything in this class may be very well able to take a CLEP test, C-L-E-P, and get a college credit for this if the college that you are aiming at accepts CLEP credits, C-L-E-P. This is a 32-week course, one lesson each week, about a 2-hour class. If you are doing this at home alone or with another group, I highly suggest that you try to get at least a couple of you together for your group so that you will have a reason to keep everything up to date and on time and not get behind. Let's open with a short word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we are grateful to be able to home educate in our state. Lord, I pray that those who fight for our right to homeschool will be victorious always here in Oregon and in other states around the United States. Father, I pray that you bless anyone investing in the time and all of the reading and writing that goes along with taking this class properly. I pray that you would bless them in Jesus' name. Amen. Welcome especially to the girls in Oklahoma. Charity and Anna are making this happen, and this will be up for you for years and years and years and years, hopefully. All right, we're going to get going. Every week, we have a volunteer read from the Imitation of Christ. And so go ahead and pause the video now and let your volunteer read the selection they chose. Okay, we'll get started again. If I remember it next week, I will share a couple of the pages that are my favorite from this edition, the Dover Thrift Edition, which just has selections from the Thomas à Kempis Imitation of Christ. Again, you can buy this book in little leather-bound editions that are bound just like a Bible would be, that you can keep for years and years and years and years, which is kind of cool. If you love this devotion, I suggest you just put it on your wish list for your birthday or for Christmas, and then you'll have this all your life to read from. He has a beautiful perspective on living life with Jesus. Session 18, seniors need to have their senior project ideas approved by the parent, teacher, or facilitator. You need to have that approved today. Tell your teacher what you want to get it done, what you want to do your project on, and turn in a paper copy next week. You don't have to have exactly an outline yet, but you have to have your idea written down, what you think you're going to do. If it does change because we do something interesting a little later in the year and you decide to swap your project out, then yes, you may, but you need to have an idea by today. So you turn in a copy either this week or next week, but let your teacher know that next week. And next week, bring John Donne. Bring your copy of John Donne. Reading, we're continuing in Paradise Lost, pages 150 to 200. We read 50 pages every week. It's from approximately book 4, line 501 to approximately book 6, line 100. And the quizzing that we do next week will be on these portions of the book. John Donne, you're reading from him this week also. You're reading 7 different sonnets, and it's all listed here in the reading part of the schedule. This is in pages 68, 69, his last poems. If this is out of print, you can email me and I have a print copy of these. You could email me and I will send these to you in an email and you can print them up. My email is Thelma, THELMA, .lito, LITO, @gmail.com. If you are not taking advantage of the quizzes and the quiz answers and the quizzing games and all of that, then and the weekly handouts, then you need to contact me so that I can send those to you. We don't have ways to keep the teacher things in a teacher area yet. Eventually we'll have a teacher code that I can give you and you can get into Thelma's library, thelmaslibrary.com, and then get the teacher materials from that source. But right now you can just get the kid things, but you can't get the quizzes and the quiz answers and the exams and the exam answers and note sets and things like weekly handouts. So those are all at Thelma's library, but you have to be able to get in by the teacher. And so you'll have to contact me. We're reading on the morning of Christ's nativity again from the syllabus. This was written by Milton when he was 21 years old. This is the coolest poem. We looked at it last week. We did not read it, did we? And writing, you're continuing to work on your Paradise Lost paper, which is due session 21. Whether you're ready or not, it's due session 21. And there are read alouds for all 12 books. I highly recommend those. I also have summary lectures. If you feel like you wished you would have read better when you started the book, you wished you would have done a better job. If you feel confused about the story and the plot and the characters, I also made summary lectures. I made a lecture for books 1 to 3 that's only 17 minutes long. I made a summary lecture for books 4 to 5 that's only 22 minutes long. And I made a summary lecture for book 6 that is only 23 minutes long. And that would pull you up to date with where we're at now. So that instead of listening to the entire book again or reading the entire book again, you could listen to these summary lectures and that might refresh your memory. So if you need those are there for you, prepared by me. And those are Thelma audios. You're welcome to share those with anybody. Next week, session 19, more Milton quizzing game and Milton and his world. Next week, pages 201 to 250. And we'll talk about when I consider how my light is spent. We did read that last week. We will read that again. Again, as I mentioned with a poem, on the time that you read it the second time or the third time, you get much more out of it. All right, John Milton, born December 9 in 1608. It's kind of important to remember these dates so that you can place this person in time. For example, Shakespeare died in 1616. So John Milton was born when Shakespeare was 8 years from his death, but their lives do overlap. And this means that Milton would have grown up reading Shakespeare, appreciating Shakespeare, because Shakespeare was one of those authors, one of those rare authors who is appreciated even in his own day, even in his own time. He was recognized as a superior writer and an amazing dramatist, everything that he made. This is a plaque outside of where he was born in Cheapside, London. The poet and statesman John Milton was born in Bread Street, somewhere on this street, and this is in the city of London. Kind of cool to get your name on a plaque in London. The large Milton home was within several blocks of St. Paul's Cathedral. And remember, later he will be part of St. Paul's Cathedral teaching there in a well-to-do mercantile neighborhood. John Milton Sr., his father, was a prosperous scrivener or legal aid, what we would consider a lawyer, a real estate agent, notary, preparer of documents, human copy machine, money lender. He's also active as a composer of liturgical music, so church music. His brother Christopher was born, let's see, how far is it from 7 years later? So they're 7 years apart. My sons are 7 years apart, and they're still quite close, and they are adults in their 30s and 40s now. So these brothers could be quite close, being two brothers in a family. This portrait was painted by Cornelius Jansen van Keulen. He's a famous portrait artist. You did have to have money to have portraits painted of children. There was no photography. It's amazing to have a portrait of a child. Milton would have been about 10 years old at this. He was tutored at home, we'd call that homeschooling today, by Thomas Young, a Scottish Presbyterian who would come to be identified with the Puritan movement. Young will present Milton with a Hebrew Bible and will trade Latin and Greek verses with him. Imagine if you had a private tutor who is identified with the Puritan movement. So naturally, Milton is going to identify with the Puritans, and so did his dad. But imagine having a private tutor who just expects you to learn Greek and Hebrew, and then gives you a Hebrew Bible and expects you to be able to teach the grammar and do the grammar, and then write poems in Hebrew and Greek and trade verses with one another. Really amazing. Milton, by age 12, in 1620, and there's a reason for this, to enter at an early age, not just because you're smart, but also other reasons. Milton enters St. Paul's, remember this is close by, the grammar school under the High Master Alexander Gill. This ensures an education that is steeped in classical and biblical learning that would underpin his mature poetry. Thanks to Gill, in addition to the standard humanist curriculum of Latin and Greek, Milton gained an intimacy of the greatest poets of the previous generation. And this is really important for us to realize that, and going back a slide, that not only did he get a biblical education, he also got a classical education. And that's why Paradise Lost is filled with so many classical allusions. I know if you're a little younger, then you may not have access to all of the classical works yet. You're not ready for Richmond Lattimore's, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Those Thelma videos are on YouTube, but we're all in a class teaching, and that is a video recording of me and of the entire class. And I'm wearing a big mask shield over my face because it was several years ago, and we were at a church honoring what the church needed us to do, was to wear the mask. And so you have to view it that way. I don't know that I will get around to making a good recording of my classical literature. It's turning out to be a lot more work than I thought it was to do American literature and British literature as it is. But classical learning is extremely important. It is important that you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, and that you read from the Greek tragedians, Aeschylus, Euripides, and Sophocles. It's important that you read some Aristotle. It's important that you read some Aristophanes. It is important that you read some Socrates and Plato. It's real, some of the dialogues. It's very important that you read all of these things. For Iliad and Odyssey, I do prefer the Lattimore translation over even the newest one. I can't remember his name, but I do prefer the Lattimore translation, and my Thelma read-alouds are of the Lattimore translation. In fact, I do a lot of Thelma read-alouds of Greek tragedies, the ones that are out of copyright, so that I can make Thelma read-alouds of those. And they are at the Classical Lit part of the website, if you're not familiar with that. I always think of my Classical Lit class as being amazing and astounding for high school students, definitely for the advanced high school student, or for a college student who has time to watch or to just even listen to the lectures, but not at the Milton level, not at the Milton level. After Milton's death, his brother Christopher, remember he's 7 years younger, remembered when he, talking about his brother John, when he went to school, when he was very young, he studied very hard and sat up very late, till 12 or 1 o'clock at night. And his father ordered the maid to sit up for him. And in those years composed many copies of verses, which might well become a riper age. So his brother Christopher remembers that when John was younger, he would stay up really late at night, making copies of verses and writing things, and his dad would have the maid stay up with him. After the age of 12, the young Milton rarely retired to bed. So that's once he goes off to Cambridge. He rarely retired to bed from any studies until midnight. Imagine by the time you're 12, you're already staying up studying late because you love learning so much. And I hope you are that kind of learner. I am that kind of learner, not quite to the level of John Milton, but I have always been that kind of a learner. And that's why even after almost 30 years of lecturing to advanced placement, homeschool, high school students, I've never tired of this, because I love learning and I love sharing with you. And I want you to be that kind of learner that realizes we don't learn for nothing. We learn for a reason. Yes, you are going to need all of this. You're going to use all of this. You'll be glad. From 1624 to 1632, he got a bachelor's and a master's. He was admitted to Christ College, Cambridge, under the tutor William Chappell, a strict, hard teacher. And at the death of King James I, Charles I ascended to the throne of Great Britain in 1625. And this is a big deal. I mentioned this to you last week. King James I, when Queen Elizabeth died, she was not married and she had no children. And supposedly on her deathbed, as she lay dying, they said, "Who's going to be king or queen after you?" Or king. And she said, "James, my nephew." And so King James of, I think, 4 of Scotland becomes King James I of England and Scotland. And this is a big deal in 1603. It is a big deal. Shakespeare even wrote the play Macbeth for this coronation ceremony. I don't think he got to perform Macbeth until 1604 or 1605 because plague had broken out in the city of London. And when plague breaks out, all the rich people who have secondary homes move out to the country to try and stay alive. I suppose some people in COVID did that. They tried to just stay home. Just think about it. If you had a secondary house out in the country, that's where you would go if there was a bad flu going around to not get it. And that's what you do when the plague went around, because the plague had a very heavy death toll and it was not very pleasant. So at the death of King James, Charles I now comes to the throne. And then he's going to have a little boy, Charles II. And Charles II is the one who will come back after the interregnum, that 11-year period from 1649 to 1660, when there was no king. So this is Charles I, who is going to be the king up until 1649, when they chop his head off and begin their, plot spoiler, when they begin their 11-year interregnum. Excuse me. You can tell I had a little real caffeine this morning. This will help you because I'll talk so fast. So Charles I ascended in 1625, and he's going to rule until 1649 when they cut his head off. Yes, that's going to happen today. John Milton Sr. lends his son's future father-in-law, Richard Powell, 300 pounds, payable with interest to create an income for young John Milton. This is $97,000 today. If you go back in time, so John Milton, his father is trying to set up some kind of income for Milton. Milton is obviously a writer. They're Puritans, so they're not politically correct. It's hard to say whether he'll be able to get just compensation for his skills. And so his father, they've already got this arranged. You know, Mr. Powell has this daughter that they're thinking they could marry off to John. And so John Milton's father loans Mary Powell's father what would be the equivalent of $97,000 and sets up a payment plan with interest that is to be paid annually, or no, semi-annually, to young John. And that way he can live on that. And then after he marries Mary Powell in a little while, they can live on that. So John Jr., our Milton author, had to collect his semi-annual payment from Mr. Powell directly. So he has to go to their house twice a year, and oh, there's Mary growing up, kind of convenient. Milton avows that possibly half of his audience of fellow students bear malice toward him, he writes in a journal. So half the kids at college don't really like him. If you look at this portrait of John early, you can see that he needs a little boost of testosterone. He's still a little bit girly looking. You know, he doesn't really have his beard yet. Maybe the other guys all have mustaches. And he went off to school so young. He's only, I think, 21 here. He went off to school. He was so young. Some guys just stay a little younger longer before they go through all of their changes. And so he gets teased a lot. Today we would call it bullying, but about half the kids bear malice toward him. He's extremely smart and he looks younger than he is. I actually have a child who had this issue. He was in college at age 14 and he knew all the answers. And that was very hard because at 14, you don't know enough to not raise your hand every single time. He had to learn that in his math class to not be the first one to raise his hand. He was so excited that he knew the answer. And what happened later is he learned to wait. And the teacher would look around, is no one else going to answer this math question? And then he would look to my son and say, okay, give us the answer, because he knew he had it. And so he'd be talked about. I'd be sitting out in the hall because he was only 14, he couldn't drive. I'd be sitting out in the hall at a table and people would come out of the class and, did you see that little kid? He looks like he's 10 years old. Well, he was 14, but he looked young for his age. And that's the problem John Milton has. He just has, he's being bullied. He expresses dissatisfaction with the curriculum at Cambridge. He sees and detests a drama on stage. So he sees a play on stage and he thinks, oh, that's horrible. That's really unseemly. Think about it. Do the Puritans when the Puritans are in charge during that time of the interregnum, 1649 to 1660, do they like drama? No. In fact, the Puritans, Shakespeare will die in 1616. And after the Puritans take control, another 34 years from then, they'll close all the stages because they believe that it's lewd and unseemly. Edward King, 1630 now, who will later be the subject of Milton's elegy Lycidas, we read that last week, is given a fellowship at Christ College under the same tutor, William Chappell. And this is how we know that they were good friends. And this is the list, and we've got the list with the young men's names on it here. Christopher Milton, the younger brother, 7 years younger, enrolled at Christ College under Milton's tutor, Nathaniel Tovey, to study law. So they both go to that same college. Milton later writes this poem about Shakespeare. This is in 1632. Shakespeare died in 1616. By 1623, Shakespeare's friends got together 7 years after his death. 1623, Shakespeare's friends got together and said, we better put all the plays in a collection so that he's remembered forever. And they put together what is known now as the First Folio. And we're very grateful for that, or the plays, many of them would have been lost because they're just handwritten manuscripts. So by assembling them put together and having a scribe put them together and buying them and sell them as a book was a great way to remember Shakespeare. And so this is just, less than 10 years after that. And Milton wrote this poem on Shakespeare. What needs my Shakespeare for his honored bones, to labor of an age in piled stones, or that his hallowed relics should be hid under a star-pointing pyramid? Dear son of memory, great heir of fame, what needest thou such weak witness of thy name? Thou, in our wonder and astonishment, hast built thyself a livelong monument. For whilst to the shame of the slow endeavoring art, thy easy numbers flow, and that each heart hath from the leaves of thy unvalued book those Delphic lines with deep impression took, then thou our fancy of itself bereaving, dost make us marvel with too much conceiving. And so sepulchred in such pomp dost lie, that kings for such a tomb would die. All right, Milton, who doesn't like drama on stage, likes Shakespeare. I'm backing up a slide to the beginning of his poem on Shakespeare. He says, you don't need like a pyramid built on top of your tomb. You don't need that. He's actually buried in Westminster Abbey and has an image of himself there. And it's pretty cool. If you ever get to go to Westminster Abbey, there's a poet's corner. And of course, Chaucer is there. And Shakespeare was also buried there. He just says, you're a great heir of fame. And this is in 1632. John Milton already is thinking, Shakespeare, you were really a wowzer, wonder and astonishment. You built yourself a monument. Your plays, everything in that First Folio is an amazing living monument. And art is usually slow. From the leaves of your unvalued book. So he's already looking at the First Folio and saying, there is not even a value to this book. And that would be pretty much true today. If you could find a First Folio, how many are in existence, but when they go up for auction, they sell in the millions. Those Delphic lives, well, Delphi, that was where Apollo's oracle was, at Delphi in Greece. And Apollo's oracle, the Delphic priestess, would inhale the natural gas and give her prophetic lines. So he's calling Shakespeare's plays and poetry, sonnets and everything, calling them Delphic, which means almost like inspired from a god or something. It's a classical allusion here, but you need to take classics to know what even Delphic means. He's sepulchred in such pomp. Any king would hope to have a tomb like that, where everyone would just remember you forever for your words. It is a cool poem. And the more you read it, the more you understand it. 1637, Lycidas is written. It's an elegy to Edward King. You remember from last week, Milton's fellow pupil at Christ College, in whose memory the poem was written. And King had drowned on August 10. His mother had died on April 3 of the same year. This is just a really sad year. And there are references in that poem to, I don't know if they call him Neptune or Poseidon. Poseidon is the Greek name and Neptune would be the Roman name. But Poseidon is the one who rode his chariot and his seahorses, whatever they're called. There's a name for them in classical literature, ride them across the oceans. And he has the trident. And he is, if you've learned the Greek alphabet, the Poseidon's name would be written with a Psi in the Greek. That's how you remember the Psi, kind of looks like a trident. Now I'm getting off course. This is why we use PowerPoint, so I will try and stay off course. 1638, Milton tours Western Europe, passing quickly through France, then concentrating on Florence, Siena, Rome, Venice, Milan, Naples, and returning by way of Geneva. Milton meets Hugo Grotius, a famous Dutch legal scholar and poet in Paris. So Milton, wow, he is in Europe for a long time. You know, I've been to Europe 5 times, but I've never gone and toured all of these places all at once. We spent a week in Paris, and I've been to Rome several times. I have been to Florence once, but each time it's, you know, one day in Florence. And we're talking about someone who goes and stays for a while in each of these cities. This is an amazing education. Travel really does teach you. 1638, Milton is well received at meetings of the Academia in Florence. The Academia in Florence, this whole place is now a museum. It's called the Academy, and that's where Michelangelo's statue David is kept, at the Academy in Florence. So Florence, if you had to talk about the Renaissance and the Reformation happening about the same time, the Renaissance taking place mostly in Southern Europe, specifically Italy, specifically Florence, specifically at the Academy in Florence. So this is the birthplace of the Renaissance. And then the Reformation took place mostly in the north of Europe. If you can only see my hands, my hands are talking as I tell this, in the north of Egypt, of Europe, specifically Switzerland and Germany. And that's where theology and the Reformation is all, the back to the Bible movement is taking place. And of course, to be a well-rounded scholar, you need both. So he's well received at the Academy in Florence, where he reads his own Latin verse. He's got his own poems that they let him read. It's thought Milton goes to Vallombrosa, a monastery near Florence. He also probably visits Galileo, who was then under house arrest by the Inquisition in Florence for thinking in astronomy otherwise than Catholicism, for having different thoughts. We say didn't burn him or torture him to death. They just put him under house arrest. And Milton probably, we don't have evidence that they met, but there is no reason why they would not have met. Milton, 1638, Milton attends an operatic performance at the palace of Cardinal Francesco Barberini. The Barberinis owned, I don't know how much of the artwork in Rome. Amazing. You can go, today it's an art gallery, and you can go visit through and look at all the art that this family, this very Catholic family, who even, this guy was a nephew to the Pope. They produced popes. So the art that they collected with the wealth of the Catholic Church, it's absolutely amazing. And he visited the Vatican Library. If you ever go to Rome, you must go to the Vatican Library. It's just overwhelming. It's just overwhelming. There's so many different buildings, and visiting the Vatican, you might give it one day. You need a week, but you'll probably have one day at the Vatican to look at some of the library rooms, to look at Raphael's, the big painting. If you have raised ceilings, it's as big as one of the walls in your house. I can't think of the name of it because I didn't write it on a slide, but all of these famous pieces of artwork that you have read about, heard about, or seen in books are housed there. Barberini was part of that Inquisition that refused to condemn Galileo. Another Barberini became Pope Urban VIII in 1623, or had become. In 1638, a planned trip to Greece got canceled, apparently because of rumors of impending civil war in England. And that's happening 1638, because there is going to be a civil war in England, and that's not a good time to travel. I think the first time we went to Greece and Italy, we left, must have been March It was in March 2003. And we left with the day the Persian Gulf War started. And that was kind of difficult to leave, but that's, it was safe. It's not like we were going to the Persian Gulf, but it was a weird time to be an American abroad overseas. And we even told the kids, don't bring hats or t-shirts with an American flag. If anybody asks who you are, say you're Canadian, because in case someone was hostile to America for that invasion, the Persian Gulf War. Crazy what happens when people are preparing for war. Everything changes and people act differently when there is impending war. Milton learns about Charles Diodati's death. Charles, remember, was his best friend from St. Paul's, possibly while visiting Giovanni. While visiting Giovanni Diodati, theologian and great uncle of Charles in Geneva. 1639, 1640, Milton settles in London, instituting a kind of private secondary school or academy. If you've ever read Jo's Boys by Louisa May Alcott, it would have been something like that, where the rich people send their kids to you to be privately tutored. So at first with just his nephews, Edward and John Phillips, and then later with upper class wealthy children as well. Milton would have been a great tutor, although harsh. By 1640, Milton repossesses Richard Powell's lands in Wheatley for non-payment of debt. Remember when his father loaned Powell £300, the equivalent of $97,000 in 1627 to provide income for Milton? Well, if you loan someone, if you're selling someone a house or you're loaning them money and they put their house up as for the value of the money they owe and you don't collect, the person just takes what you put up for the land. And so Milton repossesses. This is going to be his future father-in-law, but he repossesses the land because the guy quit making payments. Meanwhile, Milton is publishing profusely. So he's writing. 1642. So look, 2 years later, this has to be quite convenient. 2 years later, Milton marries Mary Powell. So this is the daughter of the guy who owes him £97,300, $97,000 today. And now this guy has nothing. It's important to keep track of all this to realize what's going on in his life. He's 33, she's half of that. So I think she's 15 or 16. Don't go, ew. This is the way people did it. Guys often got married. They married younger women, and then the woman would die in childbirth, and then he's going to get married again. All the women to marry are young, so you marry again. So every wife, your second wife, you're 40 or 50 and she's still, 16 or 20, and your third wife is 16 or 20 or 25 and you're 50. This is just the way that it goes because so many women died in childbirth. So she's half his age, and she left him about a month later to return to the Powell family household near Oxford. And she said she was going, and she didn't come back for 3 years. So poor Milton. She was married to him for just a little while. Who knows, did she have to marry him? Was she hoping to get her dad, a place for her dad to live? Who knows? But she goes home. She didn't like being married to him. And the Powell family declare on the side of the royalists. So they want a king. There's going to be civil war, and they're going to side on the side of the royalists, also called cavaliers, those who want a king. What do you think people like Milton, Puritans, wanted? They did not want a king. So this is really tough. The Powell family declare on the side of the royalists, and Milton accepts more pupils. The following year, Milton's Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce is published. This is 1 year after Mary leaves him. He publishes an essay that gets published, The Doctrine and Discipline. All of those letters that look like a modern F, those are S's, if you have not figured that out yet. The Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce, restored to the good of both sexes from the bondage of canon law and other mistakes, to the true meaning of Scripture and the law and gospel compared, wherein also are set down the bad consequences of abolishing or condemning of sin, that which the law of God allows, and Christ something. So he's trying to make a case that it's okay to get divorced if you really need to. Why do you think he would write a paper like that? Yes, his wife left him. Okay, because what's he going to do? If he can't divorce, what's he going to do? He has no wife. 1642, an important date, the Civil War begins. The London theaters are closed. Protestants are leaving for Holland and America. Lots of your families possibly came to America during that time. I know that my family, as far back as we can count, I think it was 1640 that some of my family came here to America. In October, Milton's brother Christopher begins service on the side of the Royalists while in residence in the city of Reading. This would create quite a problem where Milton himself is a Puritan and then his brother is serving on the side of the Royalists. That would be on the side of Mary Powell and her family, but those are the people supporting, they want a king. 1642 to 46, the war only lasted 4 years. The Royalist Army maintains its headquarters in Oxford. The Battle of Edgehill was October 23. This battle was the first battle of the English Civil War. There was no victor. The war lasted 4 more years. This is a sad war. Milton makes plans to marry the daughter of a Dr. Davis, a very handsome and witty gentleman. But just in time, Mary Powell returns. We don't know whether she was driven there and dumped out the front door by her dad, or if she went willingly on her own. We do not have those little details made available, but it's very interesting that just as he's thinking about just marrying again, and I don't know, would he have been a bigot? Was he going to get his divorce? You could have a marriage annulled if you said the marriage was never consummated. Ask your parents what that means or look it up. If the marriage was not consummated, you could ask for a divorce and then you could get a divorce. But Mary Powell comes back. In fact, the entire Powell family, all royalists, move in with Milton after being thrown out of Oxford. A year later, their daughter Anne is born. Okay, so they're back, they're married, the marriage is obviously consummated and they have a baby. But his whole family moved back in with him. So he went from having pupils and having this quiet life, but wishing Mary would come back, and she comes back with everybody. I always think this part is funny. June 14, 1625, the Battle of Naseby. This is the end of Charles I. It's the end of his hopes to achieve a military settlement. The victory went to Oliver Cromwell, the Puritan, and his new model army, Puritans. This was the key battle of the English Civil War. Charles's army was destroyed by the Parliament's new model army. The entire Powell family, having been ejected from Oxford as royalists because the royalists lost, when the forces of King Charles were no longer in ascendancy there, moves in with Milton, with at least 5 of Mary's siblings, not just her parents and maybe grandma and grandpa, but also all of her siblings. And they fought on opposite sides of the war. Amazing, isn't it? January 1, father-in-law Richard Powell dies. In March, John Milton Sr., Milton's dad, dies, leaving a moderate estate, including the Bread Street house. Excuse me. Those of you who are praying for me, my coughing does seem to be a little bit better. In August, he writes to his Italian friend, Carlo Dotti, lamenting that he's surrounded by uncongenial people. And these are all his in-laws. So he writes a letter. It's so much fun that we have these letters telling them that he's just surrounded by uncongenial people. Congenial is nice to be around. Uncongenial is not nice to be around. 1647, the Milton family, after the Powell relatives have returned to Oxford, so they finally move out, moves from the larger house in Barbican to a smaller one in High Holborn, near Lincoln Inn Fields, a quiet neighborhood. And he gives up teaching, and the army is occupying London at this sort. I always think it's kind of funny. Maybe I'm reading into history more than is available. But it's funny, after his relatives leave, that he sells that house and moves into a smaller house. And I always wonder, did he do that because he wants to make sure he doesn't have room for them to come back? I don't know. I don't know why. There are collections of Milton's letters, and I have not read through all of those. And now that I'm 65, I doubt that that's a thing on my wish list for Britlit is probably never going to happen. If you decide to teach Britlit, maybe you will read all of his letters. However, because I teach American lit, British lit, classical lit, Shakespearean lit, Old Testament survey, and New Testament survey, that's just too many classes to ever become too specialized with one class. Okay, so October 25, his daughter Mary is born. And we have this from Milton, which is kind of cool. The end of learning is to repair the ruin of our first parents. Who were our first parents? Adam and Eve. So that's the purpose of learning, to repair the ruin of Adam and Eve, of falling into sin. That's why we learn, by recognizing, to know God aright, to know who God is. That's why we learn. Everything that we learn to help us to not fall into sin and to repair the ruin that was done by our first parents. And out of that knowledge, to love him, to imitate him, and to be like him. This is such a cool quote from John Milton. And I found this at quotes.com, the educatedforchrist.org. And I don't know if I don't think that's from Paradise Lost. It would have to be from an essay or a letter. Excuse me for using that the way I found it. 1649, the public execution of King Charles I. This is a big, big deal. And most assuredly, Milton would have been there. This is a Milton biographer. I've only read one Milton biography. I own a couple of them, but I've only read parts of the other one. And then I've read a few really old Milton biographies online. But the public execution of King Charles I, and this is going to begin that 11-year period of the interregnum, 1649 to 1660. You must know this forever, for the rest of your life. Milton would most certainly have been there. And this is a big, big deal that they are executing a king. They have had a king for 1600 years, since William the Conqueror, AD 1066. They have had, after the Battle of 1066, they have had a king. And right away, Westminster Abbey was built, and they've had a king for 1600 years, and they're going to execute Charles. The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, of course, written by Milton, was published in 1649. In this book, Milton defends the right of people to execute a guilty sovereign. Milton later remarked that the piece was written to reconcile men's minds rather than to determine anything about Charles. So he wrote later, I didn't write that so that people would kill Charles. I wrote that because I wanted to say that people have the right to do that. And this slide, I hope you can pinch out and make this look bigger, or perhaps you're looking at this on your TV. The royal portrait, Eikon Basilike. So this would be, I think that means icon of the king. If you've done Greek or Latin, you might have although I think that's the royal lookalike, maybe the royal portrait. That probably is what it means. I probably looked it up one time. It's a masterpiece of royalist propaganda. And what's royalist? Yes, they're on the side of the royals, of the king. They want a king. So if you can see the little rays of lights and the ribbons that are, there are words, there are Latin words all over these little ribbons. So here's King Charles preparing to die, and the scroll around the rock. So you see the scroll around the rock in the upper left-hand corner, that the rock that has sun rays coming down at it. It says immota triumphans, unmoved and triumphant. And the beam from the clouds says cleor in tenebris. Now, you have to excuse me because I did not do Latin, so I'm slaughtering it for those of you who've done Latin, I'm sure. I did Greek and Hebrew at seminary, but no Latin, so apologize. So the beam from the clouds says brighter through the darkness, and the scroll that wraps around the tree, the little tree in the lower left hand corner, it looks like I don't know what kind of tree, a pineapple tree. That one in the lower left says virtue grows beneath weights. And then the heavenly crown that's up in the upper right corner that says Gloria. That beam of light says blessed and eternal glory, obviously, to be, and that's supposed to be contrasted with the king's, the crown that's lying on the ground, splendid and heavy, and vanity. And then the martyr's crown of thorns, which Charles is holding, like he's a martyr, like he's a Christian martyr. The martyr's crowns of thorn contains the motto. It says grace. It looks like gratia, grace. And then we see, I look to heaven, in thy word is my hope, and I entreat Christ, or by the word of Christ, and I tread on the world. Mundi Calco, you can see that. So if you pinch out, you can see all of those things. It's very easy to find this if you looked on the internet for the Eikon Basilike, the royal portrait, 1649, you'd find it. And there are probably all types of websites you can see. Anyway, it's really cool. What's the idea of this portrait? Yes, this is definitely a royalist portrait. The idea that he is going to die like a martyr. And here's the portrait again. Milton was appointed secretary for foreign tongues, so foreign languages, because he speaks so many foreign languages, in March at 288 pounds a year. That'd be the equivalent of about $600 a year today, which is a lot of money, and ordered to answer Eikon Basilike, the book supposedly written by Charles I on the eve of his execution, which depicts the king's image as that of a martyr. So they want Milton to write a book that will refute this. The book was published 10 days after Charles's execution. It's written as a diary with prayers of forgiveness for those who execute him. So doubtful that King Charles actually wrote this. Maybe he did, but doubtful that he wrote this. And this is published 10 days later, and he wrote this as a martyr. You can imagine the emotional charge with this for a royalist to read this and think that their king wrote that the night before his death. March 16, 1651, so a couple of years later, his son John is born, and the Milton family moves to a pretty garden house in Petty France in Westminster, opening into St. James Park. This would be extremely valuable land today, opening it into St. James. This is just a gorgeous place to own a home. February, the following year, Milton becomes totally blind towards the end of the month, likely as the result of glaucoma, maybe a detached retina, and he's only 44. And people debate this, what did happen? How did he lose his eyesight? We have very little information on his symptoms, what the symptoms were. May of that year, his daughter Deborah is born. And then that's February, I think, from February to May. And then, so Deborah's born May 2, and 3 days later on May 5, his wife Mary dies. So probably from complications following childbirth. If you had a difficult childbirth, for example, and were not able to get rid of, say you didn't pass all the placenta or something, and they couldn't go in, today they would go in and do a D&C and clean out the uterus, make sure you didn't get an infection, or if you bled a lot, today they could give you a transfusion. There are all types of things that can go wrong from childbirth unassisted. Many women are able to have children at home even now and do so without any problems. I know some of you were born at home, but she passed away from complications. So it's hard to say if it's from blood loss or if it was from sepsis. When you get an infection, then it just goes throughout your body. Hard to say, but it was probably not very pretty. June, his son John dies under somewhat mysterious circumstances. There's even rumors that he may have been neglected by a nurse without a mother around to supervise everything. It's hard to say what happened to him. And that's what the house looks like now. In Paradise Lost, this is where he talks about his vision being lost. If you have your copy of Paradise Lost, go to book 3 right now. I like you to know where to find these things. Mark it in your book. Go to book 3, line 1 to 55, and he even starts book 3, Hail, Holy Light. offspring of heaven's firstborn, or of the eternal, co-eternal being. May I express thee unblamed, since God is light, and never but in unapproached light, dwelt from eternity, dwelt then in thee, bright effluence of bright essence in create. Or hearest thou rather pure ethereal stream, whose fountain who shall tell? Before the sun, before the heavens thou wert, and at the voice of God, as with the mantle didst invest the rising world of waters, dark and deep, one from the void and formless infinite. Thee I revisit now with bolder wing. So this is kind of like another invocation to the muse, but it's in book 3. It's a second invocation. He's talking to the Holy Spirit, asking God, though I revisit now with bolder wing, escaped the Stygian pool, though long detained in that obscure sojourn, while in my flight through utter and through middle darkness born. Look at all the references to light, Stygian, the Stygian pool, which would be dark, light and darkness. All the times he mentions it here, with other notes than to Orphean lyre, Orpheus, the guy that played the music on the lyre. I sung of chaos and eternal night, taught by the heavenly muse to venture down the dark descent and up to reascend. Though hard and rare, thee I revisit safe, and feel thy sovereign vital lamp. But thou revisitest not these eyes, his eyes, that roll in vain to find thy piercing ray. His eyes roll around looking for light, and find no dawn. So thick a drop serene hath quenched their orbs. So I think he lost his light slowly, but here there's no light now. He's totally blind. You are legally blind if you can't count fingers from either 4 or 5 feet away. You're legally blind, and that's actually pretty blind. In book 3, line 35, he mentions, remember we did this as Milton quizzing, I think last week, he mentions blind Thamyris, Maeonides, Tiresias, and Phineas. Thamyris is from the Iliad. Maeonides, Tiresias are from Oedipus. The Oedipus Rex will be reading that. Oh no, that's in classical lit. And Phineas, they're all blind guys. And so he's talking lots. Shine inward, the radiant image of his glory. He's talking about on this side of night, line 70. Everything's about light to light, light. Lots of things about light in book 3, because he is, excuse me, he's blind. Not going blind, he's blind. Don't you love connecting up Milton's personal life with his writing? And I have written all over in the margins in book 3, underlined everything that has to do with light or dark, and realize, wow, this is it. And when I consider how my light is spent, we read that a couple of times last week, and it would behoove you to read it again today. 1655, he was allowed to use the services of an amanuensis to take dictation for him in secretaryship. Translation duties are limited. He can't translate anymore because he can't see. And he gets an amanuensis. And I probably am slaughtering that word. The Apostle Paul had an amanuensis. You'll have to look it up on your dictionary. I won't remember. I should have looked it up and typed it up in the slide with the pronunciation. That's what I usually do. Somebody who writes things down. You get in your mind what you want to say, and that person writes it all down. And then you can have them read it back to you, have them make your changes, all of those things. Milton resumes private scholarship, preparing a Latin dictionary and a Greek lexicon. And he's blind, and he's doing a Latin dictionary and a Greek lexicon. A lexicon is just a fancy word for dictionary. You don't have a Greek dictionary, you have a Greek lexicon, not a Hebrew dictionary, but a Hebrew lexicon, which is so cool. 1655, he may have worked on the doctrine of Christian doctrine, De Doctrina Christiana, his summary of his own theological beliefs. Possibly he's working on Paradise Lost at this time also. His salary was reduced from 288 pounds to 150 pounds, but that becomes a pension for life. So the work rate goes down, but he has this pension for life. And so Milton is another one like Shakespeare who is realized as being great even during his own lifetime. Dictation, he followed a regular schedule. He would wake up early to greet his amanuensis with verses ready to be scribed. If his amanuensis arrived late, he would complain that he wanted to be milked. I read that in, well, every biography of Milton is going to mention that if she or he got there late, he would say, I suppose they were all he's, I'm not sure. I need to be milked. I need to be milked. He has so much to say and he's got to get it all written down. You know, what if he forgets? So he has someone there to write everything down for him. He spent evenings reading poetry and the Bible, which means having his wife or someone read to him, which was his sole subject on Sundays. In his essay on education, Milton recommended that his boarding school students spend their evenings with the easy ground of religion and the story of the scriptures. Isn't that beautiful? His students are boarding with them, so they have rooms for their students, and he tells them to spend their evenings with learning about religion and learning about God and the scripture, which is just beautiful. Imagine if we had no TVs and no smartphones, no internet, no computers. Imagine how much more time we would spend reading the Bible. Isn't that amazing? I do think that that's one of Satan's greatest tricks, is to get us preoccupied to entertain ourselves to death. There's a book called Entertaining Ourselves to Death by, I can't think of the name. We had to read it in seminary, but it's so true. And he thought it would be television, but it hasn't turned out to be television. It's all the media, even virtual reality games. It is all of the electronics. Many of us even do our math lessons. You're watching this video online. And this is one of the blessings, that it's a blessing and a curse. We can use these electronics to learn and to watch a video from far, far away or from years ago out of our own direct time. But also we're enabled to get lost, start looking at recipes and end up watching videos and never come back. November 1656, he gets married again. He marries Catherine Woodcock. And then October the following year, their daughter Catherine is born. And then February the next year, so Catherine Woodcock dies. So again, a woman dying possibly from the effects of something with childbirth. It's hard to say. Even if you lose a lot of blood, if you can't build yourself back up, you may not survive. It's hard to say. But from October, November, December, January, she lived less than 3.5 months after her baby was born. And then in March, their daughter Catherine died. And September 3, Oliver Cromwell dies of malaria. 1658. Cromwell had been the Lord Protector of England during that time, that 11-year period of the interregnum, which you're never going to forget, from 1649 to 1660. He was buried in Westminster Abbey. But when the royalists, okay, the people who wanted a king, when they returned to power, after 1660, when they returned to power, they dug him up, they hung him in chains, and they beheaded his body. How's that for being angry? At 1659, the hangman of London burns the defense of the people of England and iconoclasties, the justification for the execution of Charles I. He burns those publicly, which is really amazing. And who's this written by? They're burning these publicly. Johannes Milton, John Milton, for the English defense of the people of England. Wow, this is a big deal. How John Milton didn't get executed or hung or something, I don't know. 1660, the revised edition, at risk of his own life, of the Ready and Easy Way. This is Milton pleading for a council of able men to lead them instead of a monarchy. Even in 1660, Milton is saying, oh, come on, you guys. Let's just get a bunch of really able men. Let's put together some kind of a government and let's govern ourselves. Let's don't have a king, don't have a king. The playhouses reopen in 1660 because the Puritans are no longer in charge. They reopen and they even have female actresses. This is thought to be a huge, great big deal. And in May of that year, we have the restoration of King Charles I, his son, Charles II. And that's the end of the interregnum, the time between the kings. That was their last chance. And it won't be till the 1770s that somebody has that chance again. And that's going to be here in America. And we decide we're not going to have a king. Isn't that amazing? 110 years later, that's going to happen in America. In Europe, here in London, it could have happened. And it didn't. And Milton was part of that. Come on, you guys. Let's just get a council of men. Let's not have a monarch. Amazing. So 1662, what is Milton writing? Paradise Lost. And that's how Paradise Lost is also political. It's not just that Adam and Eve lost paradise. It's that the British people lost paradise. Paradise Lost. He begins tutoring Thomas Elwood, this young Quaker, who would mention the circumstances of the publication of Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained in his own autobiography, which is kind of cool. And it wouldn't be easy to find a publisher for Paradise Lost. How are you going to find a publisher for something who's writing about Paradise Lost and everybody really knows what the underlying story is? That we Britons have lost paradise. We gave it away in 1660. Amazing, isn't it? 1663. All right, marriage number 3. So here's poor John Milton. Marriage number 3, he's getting older. Elizabeth Minshall, age 25, is 30 years younger. He's 55. But what do? You're 55, you need a wife, you've got kids, you need a helper, you're lonely. At 55, you could have a lot of years to live yet. And he marries again. Problems arise in the family before and after the marriage. His daughter, Mary, remember Mary, who's 21 now, is said to have wished him dead rather than married, to a 25-year-old. And several of his daughters are said to have conspired to sell some of his books to the dunghill women, which is amazing. They're so mad at their dad. They're going to sell some of his books to the dunghill women. Imagine being 21 and your stepmother now is going to be 25. This creates problems. It's just like a modern soap opera, but it's real life. Okay, 1666. They just got a king back in 1660. 1666 is the Great Fire of London. This is memorialized all over the world. Everybody remembers this date if you do world history. 1666, the Great Fire of London. The poet's father's house in Bread Street is one of 13,000 homes destroyed in the Great Fire of London, which also burns most of the printing houses. So then it's going to be hard to get things printed because all of those things burned down. In 1667, getting Paradise Lost published. It's published in 10 books originally, and then divided to 12 to make it more like Homer. Milton's agreement with Samuel Simmons, the printer, is the earliest author's contract preserved. His contract, which is kind of cool. Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, which not too many people read, and Samson Agonistes, this long epic. I haven't actually read that. It's a tragedy, a short epic. And he wrote a Greek tragedy, Are Created Out of Ruins and Darkness. These books are without rivals in any language. Paradise Lost especially. No one has excelled John Milton. No one has excelled Shakespeare with what he did. These authors, Chaucer, what he did, the Beowulf author, these English authors, please remember them forever. They did things that no one else has done before. That's why we're still reading them. In 1674, Milton dies. He dies in a fit of the gout, but with so little pain or emotion that the time of his expiring was not perceived by those in the room. That's from one of my biographies. At some time between November 8, November 10. Nobody really knows exactly what day. Gout, if you've known anybody who had gout, it's usually fat old men and they get it in their toe. Through history, there have been people who had gout. Their toes hurt so bad they chopped toes off because they'd rather not have a toe than live with the gout. It's caused by too much uric acid, and it causes your joints to be extremely painful. And that joint of the toe seems to be especially liable to gout. So it's just like arthritis. It means extremely painful joints. So it's extremely painful. Now they can deal with it with a diet and all of that kind of thing in medicine, but they couldn't do a thing then. There's not a lot they can do sometimes now, depending on the circumstances. So Milton dies. He's 65 years old. He's buried near his father in the Church of St. Giles, Cripplegate. His last direct descendant died in 1754. I think he's in Westminster now, though. I think they've moved him, or else I've messed up. Heresies and Paradise Lost. This is a favorite book. It's not as popular the last 10 or 20 years. The Elizabethan world picture, people think that it's a little bit too dated, but you would be hard pressed to find this information anywhere else. E.M.W. Tilliard. His three heresies in the Elizabethan world picture, EWP. This used to be in all college libraries. It may still be. It's a very small book. It explains that weird Elizabethan world picture. You will need that for Brit Lit. You need that for Shakespeare. This weird idea that if a king dies, the whole world is shaken up, and until a new king is on the throne, the world will not be restored to order. We see that in lots of Shakespeare plays. Julius Caesar, the graves break open, the ghosts come out, and lions wander around the streets because Julius Caesar has been killed. And you see that in Macbeth, that you see a horse ride. Macbeth kills the rightful king, and a horse rises up, in the middle of that same night or early morning and tries to eat his owner, and owls are seen in the daytime and weird things like that. It's that Elizabethan world picture. It's their worldview, so it's definitely worth your read. But it also identifies Milton's heresies, and they identify three of his heresies. And I do ask you to give Milton a little bit of grace, because John Milton doesn't have the advantage of books of theology, that he hasn't written himself. You and I have all this Bible software, and we have access to so many resources. How much would you really know about theology, proper, good theology, if you lived 400 years ago? So and you may have picked up on this, one of his three heresies is that the Son was not co-eternal. He calls Jesus a created being, the first created, and that is not proper theology. We know Jesus is in the beginning, was the Word. Jesus was there when God was creating. You go back to Genesis 1, you can go back to John 1. The soul died and was resurrected with the body. So that would be a type of a soul sleep or something like that. And that's more like a Jehovah's Witness. That's not theologically correct. To be out of this body is to be with Christ, is proper theology. And that God created the world from himself, not from nothing, ex nihilo. So we know that God created the world from nothing. And Milton thought, well, he had to create it from something. He created it from himself. But that's not theologically correct. Those are kind of, they're kind of small. They're big if you're a theologian. But for our purpose in this class, if you spotted that, kudos, good job that you caught that. And I just wanted to point that out to you so that you know those three things. All right. If you're writing a character study, who are you going to write about? You notice I've given Adam and Eve little bathing suits in my little image here. I gave her a bikini to be really risque here in my copy of the Norton Critical Edition. And who are you going to write about? I hope you've started your paper and you've got an outline going. I have all types of emails that I believe you got last week or the week before, or maybe it's this week. I have prepared emails, and in the teacher copy of the schedule, I say, take these documents and send them out as emails to everybody to give you quotes and help and characteristics of your characters. Who are you going to write about? Okay, you could write about Abdiel. He's a seraph, and he's one of the first order of angels in the hierarchy, even though he was part of Lucifer's legions. Now, remember, this is in Milton. He was part of Lucifer's legions in heaven. He's the one who's faithful to God. He stands up no matter what. Denounces Lucifer. That's back in book 5, if you need this for a quote. He's a cool symbol of faithfulness and spotless integrity, if you want words to use for Abdiel. And notice that in book 6, Raphael is telling Adam how Abdiel struck the proud crest of Satan, causing him to stumble 10 paces backward, falling on bended knee. It was fitting that he who in debate of truth had won should win the battle in both disputes alike. And check that out in book 6. I'm giving you the page numbers here. This is directly from a website, except for all the references. And I'll give you the website in another couple of slides, and it's on my inside end slide. But I got this information from a website that I'll give you the website in just a minute. But I have added all of the references here, which means they probably should have been in all types of quotes and brackets and all types of things like that. Okay, Adam, the first human created by God with his own hands and breath. He's the husband of Eve. Eve created from his rib. Adam's the image of their glorious maker. And I'm giving you all the citations in case you want to write about Adam and you want this citation. This is where it's at. Book 4, line 292. He's described as the goodliest man of men. I like that. And he's our great progenitor. That's pretty cool. He is our primitive great sire. None of these things were in the website that I copied. I added all of these. He's the prime of men. And Satan calls him this man of clay. Don't you like that? Satan trying to think of something bad to say about Adam. So he says, this man of clay. And Adam is given the task of naming the animals and tending the Garden of Eden. And we see that in book 8. Okay, what about Eve? You could write about Eve, the mother of all mankind, the first and the most beautiful woman, we're told, wife of Adam, having been made by God from Adam's rib. That's all in book 8. God's last best gift. And I love this reference to her, that she is God's last best gift. Isn't that cool? Grace was in all her steps, heaven in her eye, and in every gesture, dignity and love. And Adam loves her at first sight in book 8, which is pretty cool. Okay, your teacher, parent, or facilitator sent you a long email filled with step-by-step writing helps. So that has happened in previous weeks. If your mom, teacher, parent, facilitator has not sent you those emails yet, you need to raise your hand now, look at them now and say, did we get those emails yet? And they'll see if they emailed those to you. Michael, he's the archangel who faithfully commands God's loyal army against the rebels in the war in heaven. He wields a majestic sword. He strikes Lucifer, shearing his entire side and causing Lucifer to feel pain for the first time, like, ow! He is a sober figure and must descend to tell Adam of the future of mankind after the fall. So Michael has the job of going down and telling Adam and Eve, you guys really messed up and you're going to have to leave. Raphael, a faithful and instructive archangel sent to earth by God to warn Adam not to feel too secure. Don't let your guard down. There could be somebody sneaking around the garden. Man's free will leaves him open to the enemy. Upon his visit, he greets the fair Eve with hail, as will another angel to the Virgin Mary later in Luke 2. Hail, Hail Mary. That's where the Catholic prayer comes from. Luke 2, I think it starts at verse 42. Hail Mary, Mother of Grace, Mother of God, blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Kind of, sort of comes right from that section. So upon his visit, Raphael meets Eve and says, hail. We would call it Hail Mary, as will another angel to the Virgin Mary. In the apocryphal book of Tobit, we see Raphael. And he's called, in Milton, he's called the sociable angel, which is kind of cute. He's kind of the talkative one. The Son, the begotten Son of God, not yet named Jesus, which is the name taken during his earthly existence later. Yes, this is an issue that he's a begotten son, because even though the Bible says he's the only begotten, he's the only son. When you start talking about the Trinity, we see the Trinity in Genesis 1. Let us make man in our image. Obviously, Jesus is there. Jesus and the Holy Spirit are there. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. If you're Jehovah's Witness, you've been taught, and the Word was a God, and that is not proper Greek grammar that's not proper to put it in there. In the beginning was the Son. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the word used there is with, like you're right there together, like a prosthetic. I think the word is pros. And the Word was God. So you can't really say a God. That's improper Greek grammar. But if proper theology, I'm going to give it to first century in classical lit. We read the Confessions of St. Augustine. Wow, thought it was gone from my head. St. Augustine wrote his Confessions about 84, 9 or 10, just before his death. And in his Confessions, and then in another work called On the Trinity, he describes the Trinity. And in On the Trinity, he describes the Trinity as one in substance, three in power, or one in substance, three in somehow power in what they do. And that's really pretty good if you're going to try and say the Trinity in English. So he's declared the king of the angels, and Lucifer is so resentful that he rebels. The Son was sent finally to end the rebellion in book 6. He volunteers to die for man's sin way back in book 3. And we see pretty much the same thing in Hebrew 2:9. And then the Son intercedes with God for their lives in book 10, try to rescue their lives. And if that gives you theological heebie-jeebies, sorry, show it to your parents, talk with your parents. This is a novel. This is a novel. Beelzebub, whom, from this point on, we've kind of called him Bub, but in your paper, please call him Beelzebub. He's the lieutenant and the chief supporter of Satan in a post-Christian world where Jesus has come to the earth, rescued us, done what he needed to do to rescue us, has risen from the dead, reigns in heaven, and is there preparing a place for us where we have the hope of salvation and redemption. Characters like Beelzebub and Satan become almost comedic for us as we read Paradise Lost, don't they? They're almost comedic that they really think they can go and retake heaven and bump God off his chair. They don't, but here it's like they don't get it. They don't get how puny and how nothing they are. Comparison with even Michael. Jesus himself doesn't even have to go take care of Satan. He's going to send Michael. And Beelzebub just doesn't get it. In the Demon's Council and way back in book 2, Beelzebub is the one who speaks last, and he presents the plan for the revenge against God by corrupting man, which is in fact Satan's own plan. He's described as appearing like a pillar of state, like a wise counselor. So Milton's trying to be Homeric with these guys, making them sound like the big heroes, but we know how the story ends. So they almost become comedy. Death is anthropomorphized here. Death is Satan's daughter, a character. Satan's daughter, sin, brings forth death. He attacked his mother and he begot these yelling monsters that with ceaseless cries surround me. It's a horrible description. If you read it late at night, maybe it gave you bad dreams. Described as a horribly frightening, shadowy figure back in book 2, causing even Lucifer to be wary in its presence. Fierce as 10 furies, terrible as hell. The furies were the horrible in classical literature, in Greek tragedy. The furies are female. They're like bird, their body is like a bird, their face is like a female, and they fly around abusing people who have committed patricide, killed a parent, fratricide, killed your brother, or matricide, killed your mother. And they go around tormenting you, pecking at you, and you're the only one that can see them. So you look crazy to everybody else. The implication there is that people who kill a family member go crazy, but they were called the Furies, and they're there to drive you nuts and drive you crazy. So fierce as 10 furies, terrible as hell, and wearing a crown, it threatens Satan with a dart and mocks him. Death does. Moloch, related to Chemosh, an aggressive fallen angel who speaks first at the Demon's Council. Moloch is a cool one to write about because there's so much in the Bible about Moloch. My sentence is for open war, he says back in book 2. What can be worse than to dwell here, he says in book 2, line 85, even if it means their destruction, which would be happier far than miserable to have eternal being. So he'd rather be destroyed than continue to live. He's the horrid king besmeared with blood, the god of the Ammonites, represented as having a calf's head with arms to receive his infant victim. Instruments were played, and this is all Thelma, to cover the screams of the human sacrifices who were burned alive in his arms. A Bible dictionary will tell you all about Moloch and god of the Ammonites. You can look up Ammonites and then find whether they call him Moloch or whatever they call him and look him up. Amazing. But it would be a big iron chair that was like a barbecue. His lap was like the barbecue, this pagan god, and the lap would be like the barbecue, and you'd get the coals going, and then you'd take the sacrificial infant and burn them alive and play loud instruments and bang on drums to cover the shrieks and the screaming of the infants. That the idea was to appease this god who demanded innocent blood. And that's why he's called the horrid king besmeared with blood. And you may have some Bible verses if you have the Norton Critical Version, or I may give you some Bible verses as we read through book 2. Okay, this is where I got a lot of the information. It's still active. I checked it just a couple of days ago. CummingsStudyGuides.net/Paradise Lost at themes. They have information on themes. Oh, this was not from there. The following is preparing a theme study. This is from their website. Maybe the list of names anyway, and then I changed it around to make it a Thelma thing. Still active if you want to go there for some information. Themes in Paradise Lost abound if you're writing a theme study instead of a character study. These things abound. If the last paper you wrote was a character study, you should probably write a theme study, unless you're a younger student. If your grades 11 or 12, you're ready to write a theme study. If you're younger, if your grades 7 and 8, the Lord help you. If your grades 9, 10, then you probably should stick with a character study unless your facilitator suggests that you're ready for a theme study. In book 1, Paradise Lost, Milton reveals the central theme of the work. And he says, remember book 1, line 26, I told you to remember it and mark it, justify the ways of God to man. So explain to mankind, this is why we're having all these problems, why we have all this suffering, that he's trying to explain that to us. It's because our parents first sinned. It's because of original sin. That's why we have all these problems in our world. Justify here means to explain and to defend and ultimately to vindicate God's course of action in dealing with Adam and Eve after they succumbed to the temptation of Satan and eat the forbidden fruit. Inordinate pride, and these things are from that Cummings website. It's a cool website, Pride. I think that would be the main theme. Leads to Satan's downfall and his continuing defiance of God. You could even do a word study on, pride in Paradise Lost. It's not always called pride, but it's all from pride. Envy, arising from Satan's pride, it makes him jealous of God. He's jealous of Jesus, who's the favorite of God the Father, so he's jealous. Revenge, this is very Homeric, if you've taken classical lit already. In classical lit, like Homer, the things that you value to be a mighty man, respected and written about, to be remembered forever, is to value revenge and to value your pride. And you would be vain, and deceit is not wrong. These are all things that are part of an honor society. Western society, Western culture today is not an honor society. Remember, we're post-Jesus. And so we value mercy and grace and forgiveness. We believe in second chances. We believe that to be merciful is to be recognized as a great leader. You would have humility. Those things are all scorned in an honor-based society like Homer's Iliad or Odyssey, or here in Milton's Paradise Lost. So these themes that are from an honor society, there are some honor societies left all over the world. Of course, Muslim society is an honor society. And so pride is a huge, big, big, big deal. To be publicly humiliated in front of other people would be just the end of your whole family's reputation. And that's why a woman or a wife or a daughter who converts, say, to Christianity or runs away from a Muslim family. The only way to restore the family's pride so that anybody will marry your other children, to restore the family's pride, is to drag that person back. And if you have to, kill them to keep your family's honor. Honor is everything, public honor. And that's why it's hard for Westerners and those honor societies. Japan would be another honor society. They have traditionally been an honor society. Those people, that's why they'll do suicide squads in World War II, where you have people willing to kill themselves in airplanes to take out somebody else. You're willing to die. And the only thing equivalent we have to that here in America, except for Muslims living here in America, would be gang. Gang society is definitely an honor society where to be publicly humiliated is just the end of all that. And that's why if someone kills somebody from your gang, you have to go kill somebody from their gang, make it worse, or kill two of them. It's an honor-based society. It's an honor. So they practice things. Pride is everything, and honor, public honor, is everything. And of course, Christianity is absolutely opposite. So you could even talk about an honor society and build a paper very much on how this is an honor society here with Satan and his minions. So envy comes from Satan's pride, it makes him jealous. Revenge motivates him to corrupt Adam and Eve and thereby subvert God's plans. He wants revenge in any way he can. Vanity, that's what leads Eve to believe under the temptation of Satan that she can become godlike. If you're writing about Eve, remember that's a huge thing for Eve, that she's vain. Deceit, remember, Satan is a liar. You could do a whole paper about Satan, and you could talk about his role, how he's a shape changer and that type thing. But you could also talk about he's a liar. He is a deceiver. He appears in many disguises, and he tells everything he says when he opens up his mouth is pretty much a lie, just like 2023 during his mission to trick Adam and Eve. Satan is a liar. That's his most recognizable character trait. Infidelity. Adam betrays God by siding with Eve and eating the forbidden fruit. Unbridled pursuit of knowledge. That's what leads Adam and Eve to seek knowledge beyond their ken, knowing that will make them godlike. Volition. Angels and humans alike possess free will. If you're going to write a paper on free will, Lord help you. I hope you have a good theological dictionary. Free will in Paradise Lost to be a cool paper to read, but a hard paper to write. Enabling them to make decisions. Satan freely chooses to rebel against God, to eat forbidden fruit. The consequences of their actions are their own fault, not God's. Milton uses this theme to help support the central theme to justify the ways of God to man. Remember, that's in book 1, line 26. And of course, Adam, the whole thing that we have volition, we have free will. People ask, well, if there's a God, how come bad things happen to good people? Well, by now, if you're a Christian, you've probably heard by now that it's because there are no good people. Even the best person you know is not actually good. Still needs to be reborn and saved by Jesus Christ, to be reborn into a new person, to be born again, like Jesus talking to Nicodemus in John 3:16. You're the leader of the religious people here in Israel, and you don't know that you got to be born again. And poor Nicodemus is saying, what do you mean? Can we crawl back into our mother's womb? And Jesus is like, no. There's one birth that's, by water. There's another birth that's being born again. When you accept Jesus Christ into your heart to rule on the throne of your life. We have all these metaphors we use, but you go all the way back to John 3:16, you got to be born again, or to Romans 10:9 and 10, that you have to, if you believe in your heart that Christ has risen from the dead and died for your sins and repent from your sins, you will be born again. All of that. So we have free will. So why do bad things happen to good people and to bad people? People we think are good, or innocent people like babies or little children getting run over by cars, or little kids getting cancer. Why do bad things happen to anybody? A free will. We have free will. We are not robots. God can, with free will, people can choose to do evil and do evil things to other people. And we think, oh, why, God? Why did you allow that? Well, God, we don't want to be robots, do we? We want to have free will. And by helping others who are suffering, we become better people, don't we? But we have free will. And God knows when you're born, if you're going to live 30 days or 2 months or 3 years or 21 years or 45 years or 65 years or 100 years. He knows when you were born. He knows our days. And we simply have to accept that if we could see every single piece of the puzzle of our life, we would accept it with joy, knowing that we have played our part in the grand scheme of life and done what God wanted us to do with the time that He gives us. It's not that you're dying too young if you die young. It's that you didn't know you were going to die young, and you make your peace with that that's happening to you or has happened to a member of your family or someone that you love. It's just the way that it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. Disobedience, another theme in Paradise Lost. All sins are active disobedience against God. Anytime we do anything bad is against God, impairing or cutting off the sinner's relationship with God, right? They hide in the garden because they've done bad. Well, if you're a little kid and you've done something bad, you go hide in the corner, right? If you've taken somebody's Lego and flushed it down the toilet, you go hide under your bed, even though your mom knows you're there, or hide under a blanket, even though your mom can see you're there because you did something bad and she finds you. Adam and Eve and all the devils disobey God through their sins. Loyalty is a theme. Loyalty to God and His ways are necessary for eternal salvation. Loyalty requires obedience. All the good angels exhibit loyalty, even if they think something bad will happen to them. And repentance. Even though Adam and Eve have disobeyed God, their repentance makes them eligible for eternal salvation. And Satan and his minions are not willing to repent. Hope is a beautiful secondary theme here. At the end of Paradise, Adam and Eve enter the imperfect world with hope. They can yet attain eternal salvation, and they can have children and raise them up to love God. I think it's Genesis 4 when they start making sacrifices. And that's the first we hear. What do you do if you don't have the garden anymore? You can't just go into the garden and have God just talk to you anymore. What do you do? And in Genesis 4, it might be verse 22 somewhere. That's Old Testament survey, another class. But in Genesis 4, we read about that they make a sacrifice, and we realize, oh, wow, this is where worship starts. They come before God, they make a sacrifice, either, animal sacrifice or of praise, some kind of sacrifice, and they enter into communion with God. But it's going to be done differently after the fall, isn't it? So redemption, sinful man can reconcile himself if he is sincerely repentant for his sins. Okay, Milton quizzing. Here we are at the 1 hour, 32-minute mark. Milton quizzing is on the books that you read last week. And what I'm going to do is read the question. I wait about 8 seconds, and then I will show you the answer. And read the next question, wait about 8 seconds, and show you the answer. Now, your teacher can choose at this point, if they have printed the questions and the answers, they can turn the video off at this point. You can use a whiteboard. You can write the reference on the whiteboard and have the parent, teacher, facilitator read the question and have you look it up in your book as quick as you can, and then keep your finger there because we move forward progressively, as you learned last week. And just do it on your own. You don't need to listen to this video anymore today. If you're doing it on your own alone today, I suggest you open up Paradise Lost to book 4, about line 500, and wait for the first question. See if you can answer it. Being able to answer it in 8 seconds would be pretty remarkable. You could try, but it'd be pretty remarkable. And so I would suggest, if you're using the video, that you pause the video. Just pause it every time I ask a question, look it up, find the answer, see if you have it, and then listen to me tell the answer and see if you got it right. If you didn't get it right, you still learned the thing, right? You still learned that little item. The idea of this is to make sure that you read well and that you're enjoying what you read and to make it fun. So you do have, we have a total of 174 slides. And we are now on slide 73. So we have 100 slides of questions. So you have to think of how much time you're going to have and how much time you are going to allow for 100 questions. How much time will you allow? Are you going to allow 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 100 slides? If you gave 30 seconds, that would take 50 minutes if you were really, really quick. So decide how much time you want to take. If you go really fast so they can barely find the answers, actually, sometimes that makes it funnier. So don't despair. Don't say, it's just for fun anyway. Okay, who is to guard Eden? Gabriel, he's the guard. Who brings the word of an intruder? And of course, this is all in context. In book 4, at line 560, who brings the word of an intruder? Have your book open, have your finger there. Yes, Uriel. Define diurnal. Daily. Diurnal. Define manuring. Yes, to maneuver by hand, manually labor or cultivation. Isn't it funny? We think of manure, but manuring is like maneuvering. What has God promised to Adam and Eve here? A race descended from them that will fill the earth. Some of these things are so cool. What does Gabriel command Ithuriel and Zephon to do? They are to search the entire garden, especially by Adam and Eve, and to capture and bring back any unwanted beings. So they're looking around near Adam and Eve. Pretty cool. What do they, Ithuriel and Zephon, what do they find? They find Satan in the form of a toad, whispering in Eve's ear. Why does Satan return to his normal form? Because Ithuriel touches him with his heavenly spear, and it makes Satan pop back to his form. Define a reed. To advise. What does Gabriel command Satan to do? To go and return from whence he came. What will Gabriel do if he sees Satan in the garden again? He will chain him and drag him back to hell himself and then seal him inside. Quite threatening. What causes Satan to flee? He looks into the sky and sees the divine scale proclaim that he is weaker than Gabriel. Now, the Norton Critical Edition has a cool note on this. In my copy, it's on page 112, and it's actually pretty cool. It's a classical allusion to the scales of fate that decide whether you win or lose, and he sees this divine scale, but it's another story. Book 5. What does Adam call Eve? Heaven's last best gift. I thought several times about writing a book, and this would be the title, Heaven's Last Best Gift. What is Eve's dream here? Eve dreams of a voice close to her ear, which she thought was Adam whispering. She rose and wandered to find Adam and arrived at the tree of knowledge, which looked fairer than it ever had before. Beside the tree stood an angel who plucks a fruit from the forbidden tree and eats it. Eve is horrified, but the angel tells her that the fruit will make her a goddess and holds a fruit out to her. Eve and the angel fly up into the clouds when her guide disappears and she returns to sleep. Who does God call? He calls for Raphael. What does God tell Raphael to do? Raphael is to go to Adam and converse with him in order to warn him about his free will and to not disobey. He's to tell Adam about the escaped Satan who is plotting against him. How does Raphael appear to the birds when he flies? I'm pausing our audio here. So he appears to be a phoenix. How many wings does Raphael have? That's kind of cool. 6. He has 3 pairs. What are Adam and Eve doing when Raphael arrives? Adam is sitting at the door of his bower, resting from the hot midday sun, and Eve is preparing fruits and nectar for dinner. What does Adam think Raphael looks like? Another morning, so very bright. What does Adam ask Raphael? How the food of earth compares to the feasts of heaven. Where is Adam and Eve's current happiness from? From God. How are they to continue being so happy? By their obedience. How did God make man? Perfect, good, but not immutable, so not unassailable. Why do the angels freely serve God? Because they love him freely. What is Raphael's difficulty? He does not really know how to relate spiritual events to corporal forms in a way that can be understood any other way than figuratively. So he has a hard time translating for Adam and Eve. Why does heaven have evening and morning? So that the angels have changed, not because they need evening and morning. Pretty cool. Who does Satan envy here? The Son of God. What does Satan resolve to do? To overtake and to not worship with his legions the throne of God. Okay, he's not going to worship, he wants to overtake. How much of heaven's host does Satan take with him? He takes a third of heaven. And this is common. The first few centuries of the church, the early church, believed Satan took 1/3 with him. What is Satan's royal seat? The palace of great Lucifer, the mountain of the congregation. Who opposes Satan here? Abdiel. What is Satan's objection to Abdiel's claim that God created the angels? That there's no evidence because of no witnesses that God created the angels. And this is where Satan claims they are self-begot. Talk about arrogance. What does Abdiel predict? That Satan and his cohorts will be punished by God for their disobedience. What is Abdiel called and why? Right here in these 4 lines. The only faithful among numberless faithless, loyal, since Satan fails to move him from his stand in truth because of his love and his zeal. Book 6. How does Abdiel find the angels? Ready for war. Sorry, it's not in blue. Ready for war. What 2 angels lead the forces? Michael and Gabriel. What is the command here? To drive the rebel angels away from God and heaven and into hell, their punishment. What is the goal of the rebel angels? To set Satan on the throne of God, either by war or surprise. And this is where it gets kind of comedic, isn't it? Who is the apostate? Of course, it's Satan. Hope you got that one. What does apostate mean? Yes, an apostate is a person who forsakes his religion. He walks away. Who meets Satan first? Abdiel. What kind of fighting took place in these lines? How will it be memorialized? In what specific words? Worthy of eternal fame, with no thoughts of retreat or any deed made in fear. That's quite a memorial. What is the cause of Satan's first pain? The sword of Michael cuts open his right side and he feels it. What can angels do? They can assume any form they wish. Why does Raphael not mention the glory of more angels and not mention any rebel angels? The angels are content with their fame in heaven, and they don't seek men's praise. The rebel angels, although they were not less brave, have been canceled out and their nameless fame lives merely in oblivion. Since they fought without truth, they don't get any praise. What are the rebel angels susceptible to that the faithful are not, and why? The rebel angels are susceptible to weariness, fear, pain, all because they have sinned. That's a cool word picture. Which side won the first day's battle? The faithful angels won, of course. Which chapter in Genesis is this referencing? This is a challenge question found right in these lines. Which chapter in Genesis does this reference? And of course, that's Genesis chapter 6, the Nephilim, the giants in Genesis chapter 6. Anytime you see a Hebrew word, something in the Old Testament, and it ends with an I-M, it is probably masculine plural. And so it's not Nephilim, it's a Nephilim, like seraphim, cherubim, Nephilim. So that's all about the Nephilim. And this is the end of today. These are the works cited, works that I have on my shelves and consulted, and the Cummings studyguides.net, which is a really cool website. And they have more. They have study guides on more works than just John Milton. Have a fun week, and I will see you next week. Lord bless you.